Welcome back to the School of Imperfection podcast. I'm your host, Mikey Crystal. Today I'm talking with Gabriel Currie, founder of Echopark Guitars, and we got connected via a clip we posted of the podcast we had with Scott Paul of Taylor Guitars. He's the head of sustainability, and he gave me a tour. Awesome dude, Scott Paul. Good guitars. Gabriel had an insightful comment, and I clicked on his profile and saw him standing there with Marcus King, who's one of my favorite artists. And I was like, who's this guy? And I started understanding that he's no joke. Echopark Guitars makes guitars for some of the biggest and best artists in the world. He makes these like deeply personal instruments for people like Joe Perry, Brad Whitford, Josh Homme, Troy Van Leeuwen, Jackson Browne, to name a few. But this episode isn't really about celebrities and their guitars. It's about what happens when the thing that saves you also becomes the thing that you give back to the world. I resonate with that a little bit with the painting stuff, you know? I don't have celebrities' paintings yet, but give me a call with someone famous. That would be cool. Anyway, Gabriel grew up in East LA and Highland Park, surrounded by punk rock, chaos, old radios, loud trains, and a whole lot of weirdness. School didn't work out for him, normal didn't work for him, but somewhere in the middle of all that, guitars did. We talk about growing up as an outsider, finding punk rock, surviving addiction, going to prison, becoming a father, getting clean, and finding his way back to the craft that had been calling him the whole time. The way Gabriel talks about guitars is technical, spiritual, emotional, and a little feral. He talks about old wood like it has memory, sound like it's a transmission, and guitars like they're communication devices for the soul, and they kind of are. So this episode is about guitars, survival, punk rock, purpose, old wood, redemption, and the miracle of turning everything you've been through into something that can sing. This is Gabriel Currie of Echopark Guitars. Gabriel, howdy. Thank you so much for joining.
Appreciate the invite, man.
So we were talking on we had Scott Paul of Taylor Guitars posts, and you chimed in with a good little tidbit of info, and then I was looking at what you do, and we decided to make this thing happen. And so you make guitars. How long have you been doing that? What's your story? Start from birth.
Birth. East LA, Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital, 68, I guess. Mom and dad were kind of from different cultures and merged during the mid 60s, free love kind of thing. And dad was an art student and a beatnik, and mom was a aspiring hippie. And so the landscape is pretty fertile in terms of like music and art and the emerging culture, kind of thing in LA and all over, of course. But my dad used to go to a little place called the Abbey in Highland Park, and all the beatniks of the day would convert to this dilapidated church and do the dobro Jews harp thing, and recite poetry and show off their latest turtleneck, I guess. But he dodged Vietnam somehow, and or he was tour like a year earlier, something like that. And so I was born in 68, so that kind of thing. So I had a dad at home, who was an artist and a civil engineer, and who had like his tinklings and inklings in early rock and roll, kind of even mid 60s LA thing. So I guess when I came along, he was kind of, had his, I think it became sort of a little bit of a project for him in a sense, you know what I mean? Because he kind of didn't do that thing, you know what I mean? And said you want your kid to do that thing that you kind of didn't, you know what I mean? Because school was a struggle big time. When I entered kindergarten, the first memories I have is like punching kids, and stuff like that. And not, it was kind of I grew up in Highland Park, which is a suburb of Los Angeles, which is basically East LA, lots of gangs and stuff like that, and Caucasian-ish and mostly Mexican neighborhood kind of thing. So I got jumped into the avenues a couple of times as a kid, once in grade school and then once in junior high. So the neighborhood was pretty rife with like violence and alcoholism and drug addiction and all those kinds of awesome things that you want to raise your kids in. And alongside a lot of neighborhood bands and stuff like that. There was the 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 house, the road behind us is Cypress Avenue, ends on Division Street, and there's a bunch of like old Mexican bars and hotels and shit like that. It's still to this day, it's pretty much the same. And it's just really loud. It's where all the Southern Pacific Railroad converges. There's like a big giant like railroad crossing that's there in LA. It's like alongside the LA River and San Fernando Road. So it's just a big clank and crash of like, all day, all night, boxcars and whatever. So lots of noise, lots of chaos, lots of, funk in the air.
Yeah.
And and my parents gravitated in the 70s towards like Mormonism, so very juxtaposed upbringing, like lots of that kind of culty religion shit, and then the elements that I'm growing up around, and then what I'm hearing on the radio in terms of like early Aerosmith, that kind of thing. I grew up in the advent of FM radio, like as AM switched to FM, I was listening to the radio. I was as tapes were turning into CDs, I was seeing that, that kind of shit. So I grew up
Yeah.
from records to tapes, you know, I pretty much saw the whole evolution of music, and from like synsonic drums that came out in the 80s, like LA is kind of like the epicenter of emerging commercial everything, basically, or New York or Paris or London or whatever. But like it's a major city where a bunch of stuff's coming out of. So when I was in the sixth grade, I was ditching school and going to go see like Wasted Youth and Fear and Black Flag and Circle Jerks and all that kind of shit at the Cafe de Grand and Stardust Ballroom and the Olympic Auditorium. And so I grew up in like late 70s, early 80s punk rock, basically in LA. I grew up in that whole thing. All my East LA friends, we were all like Mexican, half Mexican punk rock skater kids, basically. And then lots of trouble, lots of delinquency, lots of long nights and stuff like that, lots of loud, happenings of sorts, and lots of fun, pretty carefree. Also pretty dangerous. Lots of no cell phones, you know.
Good
So
old days.
so a lot of things. I don't know, I think women are a lot safer these days. And I think
Well, that's
I
fair.
think kids and women are a
Yeah.
lot safer these days as a result of the advent of that technology. So thumbs up to that.
Yeah, that's a really fair point. I mean, I get burnt out on social media, but at the same time, there is a lot of benefits. Were you playing music at this time?
Oh yeah.
Were you in a
Yeah.
band?
Yeah, I was in the band called God Forbid, and we kind of came. It was like Lance Krantz from Detox and a couple of older guys. I was still like 16, 17, at this time. And my delinquency was kind of getting into full bloom too. So I was a troubled youth. I grew up in a pretty violent. I skipped over that, but it was pretty violent growing up in my household, and I didn't have a lot of places to run, or go. I had to always come back to that thing, And
Yeah.
getting into music, I needed something to do, an expression, you know. And also, a lot of dudes at that time were converting their dad's Strats into like Van Halen guitars and shit like that in Hollywood. So I got into that racket a little bit. That's kind of where I got my first kind of taste of blood in terms of getting into guitar stuff, because it was like I was more into like Howlin' Wolf and BB King and Jimi Hendrix and Fear and punk rock and shit like that. And these guys were like shredding at like 13, and I just was like, nope, not me. But
Yeah.
I know how to work a drill and a router, and my dad was a crafty guy, so I was in the in the garage a lot, and it just ended up that need for escape found its way there. That's kind of
Yeah.
startled because it's a passion. I worshipped Elvis. I used to draw Les Pauls. I used to as a child, my elementary school years going back ways were like they took me out of kindergarten, put me on Red Linen, put me in EH classes for the rest of my tenure in elementary school. So yeah, we were the ones that like had the line drawn around us on the ball court, and when the other kids came out to lunch, we had already been out there for 10 minutes or so, and so all the bullies would like come over to us and like start pelting us with the balls and shit. It was horrible. It was cruel and pathetic and fucked up and all that shit. And it was like, and the parents and the teachers just like, yeah, it was back then it was entertainment, I guess. Today it would be like jail time,
Yeah. I guess there's a greater awareness now of what that does to a kid versus then they were like, yeah.
Putting children on lethal doses of methamphetamine is not the answer.
Yeah. That's a whole other journey. Lord knows.
Yeah, no, and that's kind of where my imbalance and balance kind of merged, By the time I was taken off from those mares, and by the time I was in junior high school, I was already pretty much a crash course in life, and a crash course period. I showed up the first day at junior high school with a bottle of vodka that was protocol, 1980s, And so I didn't really have a good educational career, let's just say. I gravitated towards the cultural points of interest that I thought were, cool, But that was about it. I ditched school constantly. I was a child of the street, I would ditch school and go to Valley Arts Guitars or Glenn Guitar Shop or some of the neighborhood guitar shops and just hang out with the dudes in the back and kind of pick their brains. And I wanted to play better, but I just, my faculties wouldn't allow. I was also born with a little bit of cerebral palsy, umbilical cord around the neck, breach, kind of thing. So I've struggled with that my whole life, I've adapted, of course, but I think I'm lucky actually, because there's a lot of people that have this thing that they can't even get out of a chair, you know what I mean? So I've very mildly affected, but it's still been one of those things where it's just enough to piss me off, you know what I mean? It's just enough so that some of the faculties that I have aren't quite sharp enough, or the twitches and shit like that. So those things are all the way culture is presented to us, in the way that the norms are established. Anything less than a certain status quo and you're a fucking weirdo or whatever, and people are cruel and insensitive, and so if you're not a strong-willed individual or don't have a good strong constitution, belief in yourself, it's this is what can turn you,
Yeah, I do, as it so happens. I mean, do you think that's what drew you to like punk rock and that type of music?
Absolutely. I mean, I found a way to get out the aggression there. I found my people, it was like we had our tribe, we were all huddled, a bunch of fucking rejects, really. And yeah, I mean, that's how it always felt to me. It's like we always found each other, and didn't do a whole lot of crying and talking shit about our folks and any kind of stuff like that. That didn't happen until much later in life. That didn't happen until after I was a parent, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And a husband. So yeah, and I was like, oh motherfucker, But
yeah, now I get that. Yeah. How did you get from there to what you're doing now, which is building guitars? And I saw you posted something with Marcus King, who's like, I love Marcus King. Like, are you making guitars for like rock stars? Like, where are you right now, and how'd you get there?
Yeah, I mean, I've been very fortunate. I've been very lucky and very blessed to be able to walk into rooms and present my work and have it be accepted as art, inspiring, something that somebody wants to play. And it goes a little deeper than that. I think the fact that I need a purpose kind of drives me to that, where it's like that's accessible to me. I understand the relationships of the individual parts and how they work together in a way that I can't even explain. I just understand it. And And maybe it's a little bit of a certain touch of alchemy or something like that, is a label that we can understand. But I think for me, it's a combination of the need to prove myself as worthy to be here, period. The want to belong to a certain group of people, let's just say, makers, let's just say, artisans, let's just say. I don't look at myself as a guitar maker so much as just another artisan in the field of music and entertainment. It's not. I'm not a luthier. I don't think I might be like maybe in 10 years or 20 years or something when I've really done a lot. I think it's something that is to be earned. And I think that title is. It's funny too because you can go to a school and they'll like give you a piece of paper. You give them 30 grand and it'll say that on there and you sign it and some other dude signed it and it's good to go. I've hired all the people. They all don't know what they're doing in a room alone with the guitar. Sorry. sorry, all you guys out there that have spent that kind of money on your education. But to truly be able to craft something from your heart and have it be received, cherished enough to then give your own self to and perform with every night and rely on and depend on and believe in and these aren't just things that are like off the showroom floor of the factory, showroom. All the guys that I work with, all the humans, all the artists that I work with, each have their own set of flaws and characteristics and idiosyncrasies and desires and things that they hear in their head. And that's what I'm after. I'm after what that person hears and how they want to feel a thing. What matters to them is what matters to me. So over the course of the last 20 years or so, I've been able to work with a lot of really inspiring people and I don't mean just inspiring to me. I mean like rock stars that have been like bona fide, like when I first started working with Jackson Browne, let's say. It was very early on, and he would come out to the shop and we'd go over like all the wood because I started collecting wood as a kid. Like for some reason, one of my first jobs as a young kid at a boys' home was working at G&L Guitars, and I had worked for a flamenco guitar player just prior to that for about 6 months as an apprentice. And I came in one day and he was retiring. And he announced his retirement, and he handed me a piece of paper and they had a phone number on it and said I had an interview in the morning and I should be at this address and here's the number and that kind of thing. So I followed the instruction and it happened to be G&L Guitars and Leo Fender, George Fullerton, and Floyd, the three original dudes that started Fender in the early 50s were the original. Were at the table with me, hiring me as a kid to build guitars in their shop. So that experience has repeated itself a bunch of times in my life where I found myself in the room with like luminaries, like, and just like, oh wow, like I'm doing this. Okay, this is cool. So it's like that every time. But like I started pretty young with that experience. I worked until he passed away. And then I went to work for a guy named Takashi Hosono in Los Angeles, and he built nothing but custom guitars, and he built all the early USA Ibanez stuff, and just, very, very, he was an artisan who was hired out to do other company stuff. I think Roger Sadowski, a little bit of Michael Tobias. So he was doing some contract work and then his own custom stuff. So I came in as his assistant after my tenure at G&L, and I worked with him through the 90s and learned all the rest of the skills in terms of wood selection, radiusing fretboards, neck shapes and carvings, different pieces of wood, how they work together, pickups, the interactions of the magnets and winds and wire sizes and potting or not potting, different size, different variances and potential values for different parts of the instrument itself. Like what's a good tone pot, what's a good volume pot, different materials for different fretboard, like all the different fretboard materials. It just went on and on and on. It's just a complete immersion into like how really great guitar is made and what are the differences in like tonalities. You know, you can have articulate, you can have dark, you can have bright, you can have a lot of bottom end, you can have a lot of top end, you can have their balance, you can have heavy, light. There's just so many different variables that they can be boxy, they can be comfortable, they can be ergonomic, they can be space age. You know, this every iteration. So it's kind of like an endless canvas, if you will, you know, of different things to explore. So when I was a kid, I grew up listening to the things I gravitated to was like, it just happened to sound like, I just happened to like a lot of Key 90 rock and roll, a lot of Foghat, Leslie West. For some reason, my ears just was always liking that particular sound. I don't know why. I think it's the mid range or something like that. But so by the time I got into guitar making on that level, I had already kind of amassed a little bit of a know-how in terms of how things, you know, how the materials work together, you know, and how to steer an instrument into the direction that I wanted, you know, tonally, acoustically, ergonomically, you know, like really a lot of it is based on what we see, you know, a lot of it is based on how pleasing it is to the eye. You know, that's what's going to make you want to pick it up or not. You know, it's kind of like there's something that's, if you don't want to eat it or fuck it, you know, you're probably not going to want to buy it, you know, or pick it up even, you know what I mean? So it has to kind of sort of has to talk to those primal kind of urges, you know, and not just for dudes, you know, like women have that more than we do. So yeah, it has to speak to the senses, whatever it is, you know, and so knowing that, having that deep immersion for that early period of time and then walking away from it, because I decided like in 94 I didn't want to build guitars anymore. I just didn't. I wanted to play them, you know, and I wanted to make music, but I didn't want to build it anymore because I had too much information in my head, and I love it. I loved it still, but I had to split because LA was just accessible, and mid '90s was just not a good place to be. You know, like if you're trying to do anything like in the music industry, it was very raw with like heroin and a lot of dark shit. So it was like I,
Right.
I moved down to I went down to San Diego and I hooked up with a guy named Scott Madison, and we started building these replicas of Explorers and Flying V's and stuff like that. And I got into that for a couple of years. And then I did my own thing up until about the late 90s. And then I became disillusioned with all of it completely. Music, instruments. I lost myself to drugs. I was in and out of prison for a bunch of years. Yeah, till about the early aughts, you know, like around 2004 or 5, I was lost. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I didn't feel worth the privilege of that, you know?
Yeah.
It became a burden because the struggle to, you have to really have a lot of self-love to do anything that puts you out front, you know, and that puts you out in front. You have to really have a lot of self-love, because if you don't, you may find yourself there and void of the wherewithal to continue, you know. And that's kind of what happened to me. I wound up getting strung out on heroin for a good decade. And yeah, it cost me a bunch of stuff. Mostly it cost some other people a lot of stuff too. And that's the part that really is but
Yeah.
but you know, you know, I obviously I survived that period of my life, and I came back to it. And when I did, I I had become a new father too, pretty close to that period of time. And it gave me another it gave me another reason, you know, to continue with that. I could see where the benefit of pursuing that could be a good example. And so that's what kind of that and just like the sheer willpower of like wanting to make something out of my fucking shit life, you know.
Yeah.
And knowing that I had had enough experience and enough tools in my tool bag that if I could muster the inner portion of this, you know, the self belief that I could probably figure it out. So at the time I'd had some job that I was working in construction or something like that, and I was doing well, making decent dough. And it just I suffered an injury on the job, and I didn't want to tell my wife that I couldn't go back to work and shit like that. I started making a bunch of excuses, and then I finally had to throw in the towel because I just couldn't. And it was during that period that I decided that I had to do something different. And and by this time I'd been clean for a couple of years and things like that. And I was, the family was in full tow and everything was good. And my wife, she's I had enough belief in me to pull out a credit card and buy a couple of tools and get going on this thing. So I had a stash of old wood at my dad's house. And I went and grabbed some of it and made a junior. I figured if I could make a junior with my bare hands in the backyard, and it was like, if I could do without any instruction, any help, any kind of anything, just based on osmosis and what I remembered of the things, that if it was good enough, that I would take it to a couple of friends and get their advice and stuff, and then take it from there. And so I did all that, and it turned out great, and I wound up hooking up with an old mentor of mine as a result, and he invited me to his shop, and that's kind of how I got started. Maybe a year after that, I had amassed a collection of things that I had built, and it was maybe a dozen pieces or so. And there was a guitar shop in LA called Caveman Music, and he was kind enough to let me display them in his shop. And at the same time, Aerosmith was coming to town, and a friend of mine who owned a studio at the time was there was hosting them for their recording of the last record that they did in the studio, anyways. And somehow Brad Whitford's guitar tech at the time had gotten a hold of me because the guitar player that was in Nick Oliveri's band, who I was friends with, it was just a weird like connection of dudes. It was just like, yeah, this guy, that guy kind of thing. And my name
Yeah.
kind of came up as anyways, some pictures wound up in front of Brad. He liked them, and and he requested the guitars get sent out to Boston. I didn't know it was dry. I hit a friend of mine who at the time was a big, he had a giant studio there. And I called him up because I had never done anything like that. And so I needed some advice. And he's like, oh, that's ironic. They're going to be in my studio in June. This was like April. So I had a couple of months to get a batch of things ready that could be presented to these groups. So yeah, I readied myself. I went up and I kind of just like got everything. It just kind of took that time and got everything really together, and made sure all those instruments were really great examples of what I wanted to do. And I showed up with them, met Steven, and Steven actually introduced me to Jack Douglas first, who was there and setting it up. And Jack had already heard some of the guitars because Brad had already had the guitar in hand. And Jack is the one that actually introduced me to Joe Perry. And that kind of began that whole relationship because Jack only wanted to use that guitar on the whole recording.
No shit. So how long was it before? So you were building guitars. You had this period of your life that got dark. You found your way back. How old were you at that time? And how long had it been since you made a guitar? Did you just because I know you took us through it, but did you really just fall right back into it? Like, I could always do this. Like, what was that experience like?
Yeah, I mean, building guitars and I parted ways under duress. It wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't a healthy separation. Let's just say. I knew that I had to get out of there because two things. I didn't want to become the industry guy at the NAMM show with the badge, ushering people into the booth to come, whatever the fuck, and play my shit.
Yeah.
Da.
Yeah.
No. That was like, no, I'm not fucking doing that. And the other was like, I had to decide like what I wanted to do with my fucking life. Like do I pursue music as a player or do I pursue this thing as another weirdo, in this thing? So and it took, I'm slow, so it took me a minute, and I don't decide things quickly, And it just took me a minute. I had lost. There's a couple of things. I was kind of disillusioned by the whole guitar industry thing, and also as an artist, and I hadn't yet decided what I wanted to use as my medium. You know, so in the interim, what happened is I got to play a bunch of old guitars because it was the '90s, and I still had access to like a bunch of cool shit for cheap. You know, there was still plenty of '50s guitars floating around pawn shops all over downtown LA. There was black
Yeah.
market music. There's all kinds of vintage shit everywhere. I grew up playing vintage guitars. So to my mind and to my ears, all the new shit just didn't sound right to me. So I was kind of like, it was always bugging me. It was always
Yeah.
bugging the fuck out of me. Like why can't, there was just this weird thing that was missing, you know, for me, not for any, I didn't give a fuck about anybody else or any other guitars. I just knew that like when I picked up a Junior, it didn't sound like a Charvel. And then when I picked up a fucking a Black Dark Telly, it did not sound like anything new. Like there was just marked differences between the two. And then around the beginning of the 2000s, these new like kind of more Art Deco kind of guitars started becoming popular, like James Jussard and Dennis Fano. You know, they were like shabby chic, kind of worn in looking, kind of retro looking, kind of neat looking, but they all played like dog shit and sounded like ass. You know what I mean? To me, anyways, because I went and tried and I was like, all right, I gotta check this out. Because I'm still interested in guitar, so I'm still gonna go check them out. I'm just not doing anything yet. You know, I'm still trying to decide. And then I saw examples of like, okay, dude, people are buying this shit, and if they're buying that shit, based on looks, then I think I got something for their asses. So I went back into the wood pile and dug out some old shit and started getting busy, like combining what I thought was best, you know, pickup lines, all the different, all the things you could think of. I just wanted the best of it. And then I had to decide on what radius was best and, you know, all these different decisions. So I took about 3 years to decide what was really the thing that I wanted to do. And the thing that I wanted to do is make a brand new guitar that sounded, felt, and played just like a fucking old one. You know, but not a copy. You know, not a copy. But so what was that? Well, I had to use old wood, number one. Because that's the number one difference is the timber. I don't give a fuck what anybody else says about that. I don't care. I don't care any experts, scientists, builders, veteran. I don't care. Fuck. I know. Like the wood matters. The materials matter. It's not one thing. There's some other parts, you know. And it also takes a little bit of somebody's DNA, you know, a little bit of sweat, you know, a little bit of like energy that comes from a human as an energy source into another energy source. Now it's not a source, it's just a tool, but you can put your energies into a physical thing and it then has your energy. That's a fact. So knowing that, and you know, I studied some esoteric shit and all that kind of crap. In prison, I did a lot of reading, let's just put it that way, and a lot of meditating. So I'm connected. Let's just say
we can do a full follow-up episode just deep diving into that shit because I love that world. Actually,
there's no joke there. It's all real.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's all real.
Sorry, I didn't mean to knock you off your train of thought.
No, it falls in line. I mean, it's the thing is like, aside from all the troubles and woes and bullshit, there's a whole other world out there that's free and clear of all that crap. So, no, like the only time I feel like at peace or at ease or like I'm contributing to this thing is when I'm making my shit. You know, when I'm building my stuff, and when I'm serving the purpose of creation, of creativity, you know, of evolution, of moving forward, of discovering, of learning, of always staying open to the idea that I could do this better, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I feel the same way about painting, and it's like, that's my happy place. And it's almost my safe place too. Like the anxiety goes away, the the shit doesn't exist, you know, and
Yeah.
the the method that the way I do it is like all just like piles of mistakes and shit, and like I don't know, it's like a Xanax, you know what I mean? A safe
Yeah.
place.
Yeah. Yeah. Over the years, one artist kind of goes into another, and kind of like, because the reason that I'm working with Marcus King is because of Josh Homme, you know, and the reason I work with Josh Homme is because of Joe Perry, and the reason I got even they're all connected, everyone's connected. So it's like there's so many artists that I work with that are everybody's just connected, and that's kind of like the part of it that's like magical and cool and otherworldly is fantastical and beautiful. But the honest truth is that it's a lot of fucking hard work, physically, mentally,
Yeah.
emotionally. And because I'm not inspired every day. That's kind of the blessing and the curse of being an independent artist, and which is really what I wanted to touch on is the consistency and the quality and the availability and the time that it takes and the time that it doesn't take. All these factors of like spending money on a thing that I do, for a living. It's not easy, man. It's hard. It's really hard. It's really tough because you're serving people that have all these different expectations, you know, and also different tastes and everyone's coming from a different place, a different understanding of what that is, and a different idea of what good sound is too sometimes. And when you listen to music these days, it's on a plastic device. It sounds weird, you know. Nobody stands in front of a guitar amp anymore and cranks it, there's no the images of a JBL speaker with your head being wind blowing your hair back is no more. You know what I mean? So we don't listen to stuff like that. We don't listen to things physically the same way anymore. So there's a whole generation of people that doesn't know what that is. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's the real shit to me, because that's what I grew up in. Standing in front of Marshalls in the garage, cranked. You know what I mean? Like that's how I grew up playing music, and all the mistakes are right there, so you have to have faculty, you know?
Yeah.
And in the same way that in the field of work that I'm in, you have to have back, you know? I consider when I'm kind of more like a needy suit kind of guy, to the guitar world than I am a luthier or a legit guitar company, because I'm not. I'm just a weirdo that has a lock on a couple of dudes in the industry that has their faith and love and friendships, and we express it through guitars.
Yeah. Well, you're an artist. And I mean, there is like, I feel like, we just met, but like there is an artist making their art, and then there's a factory making a product, like you can paint and you can buy a painting from Ross Dress for less. Like also, like these both things are a product, if you will, but they're not the same.
No.
And you connect with someone who resonates with your art. That's got to be a blessing, especially when they're the people at the caliber.
Dude, the coolest thing about it is, making a piece of art that's a communication device that a real artist is going to communicate with.
Yeah.
It's sort of like making a fucking paintbrush for Picasso. That's kind of how or providing the paint to the canvas, that kind of thing. I don't want to get all weird, but like, yeah, it's definitely like having somebody like Josh or Josh, because there's nobody like Josh, having Josh, use my instruments and effects and amps and stuff like that as his paintbrush is pretty cool. It's not just because he's a rock star or whatever, but like I know the dude and he's pretty intense, and to have that kind of dude believe in your shit, not only stand behind it, but be willing to go like get, violent behind it. You know what I mean? Like really, like he'd throw down over the shit, no joke. And that's the kind of dude that I fuck with in the industry. Like the people that I usually end up being very close to and providing instruments and working together with are usually the dudes that are kind of like me, I guess. You know what I mean? They're little south of normal, you know, a little
Yeah.
north of fuck up, you know what I mean? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But able and willing and ready to do their thing, you know, and that's really it's great to like have comrades in an industry that I'm not even really a part of. You know what I mean? Like I feel, you know what I'm saying? It's like I feel more of like a secret weapon to these guys than I am a business person or a colleague or a provider whose services or goods. You know what I mean? It's a little.
It sounds better though. I think I'd rather be the secret weapon than the guy at the uh, corporate headquarters.
Yeah, no, we get to laugh at those dudes.
Well, so, like some people thrive in that atmosphere and some people don't. I've never been able to make it work for me. Anytime I've done like the corporate thing, one of the scariest things about the corporate thing is how quickly it pacifies you. Like you're like, oh, this is comfortable. I guess I like going to get my coffee at the Keurig thing in the free granola bars. And I'm like,
Yeah,
I don't know. But then it never lasts in my experience anyway.
What about the casual Fridays?
Casual Fridays, man. You know, it's casual Friday every day in my life. Can we finish off with your process a little? Because that's one thing we haven't talked about is like, what exactly are you doing that's different? And, you know, because I think a lot of people who don't know, they know that Fender guitars are a cool guitar. And that's what you got, you know, versus like the people who really understand the music and the art of building a guitar, you know, like where are you approaching it from?
Well, I moved to Michigan about 10 years ago in order to seek out a stash of wood that I like, the never ending stash. And I found it all over northern Michigan. There's like, well, it was a furniture hate, you know, and this was like one of the first industries in America was furniture, and it all came out of Michigan. And a lot of the car industry utilized hardwoods in the 40s and 50s for like making molds and shit like that, and a lot of different stamp and die kind of things. So there's an abundance of like South American wood here in different areas. Different suppliers had it, so I was able to find some really good old stashes of like South American woods, mahoganies, rosewoods, things like that, and then just the most unbelievable collection of like old maples, sassafras, and another species called box elder that I've been using for a minute. And also there's, I guess I should talk about this. So during the 1800s, actually the 1700s, the Boston Tea Parties were basically because the the Confederates didn't want to give up the timbers to the English army anymore to supply them with shipbuilding material. So they burnt down the forest. That's what the Tea Party was about. They burnt down the forest. The woodworkers did. And so the next abundant place of timbers in America was here, the northern part of Michigan. So that started getting clear cut by a company called Hackley and Hume back in the mid 1800s, amongst a bunch of other mills. They were the ones that erected in Muskegon and put Muskegon on the map, basically. That mill was responsible for untold tons of waste in the way of sinker logs. The logs that got rolled down the river, a good percentage of them didn't make it to their destinations. They got sunk into the bottoms of the rivers and lakes all around Michigan. And so when I got here, I learned about that and immediately started trying to find these stashes of ancient woods that were in the waters. So I did. And that's what I've been making a lot of my Clarence models and S-types and bolt-on construction guitars are made out of this very old, extinct wood called white pine. It's fascinating. It's very old stuff, and I love working with it because it's old. It's got all the right properties. It's got this immediate bell tone to it. It's lightweight. It takes finish really easily. It's easy to work with. The tools love it. It's kind of like a new discovery, and nobody's using it. You can't buy it anywhere, and I've got a lock on it. So I'm gonna only do it here using it. Probably not now after this thing airs, but like Like a company like Fender couldn't come here and buy a bunch of it because it's not for sale. They'd have to dredge, they'd have to pull it up, they'd have to kiln dry it, they'd have to mill it and ship it to wherever Fender makes their guitars at, kind of thing. And they're not going to do that, you know?
And are you doing that? Like, are you put on a scuba suit and like how are you getting? I mean, not to divulge your secrets, but are you personally like?
No, I have a couple of knuckleheads that I met like back in the day when I moved here, and they had a good relationship going, and they don't require much, and they love doing it. So that's what they do. It's kind of like the guys in Florida that go like, crocodile hunting or whatever. There's just a bunch of dudes that like to do shit like that here that are from old mining logging families, and they still do it. So up north, I've got a little mill a buddy of mine erected, and we just pull logs out every couple of months and slice them up. And so I've got 3 shipping containers full of sliced up wood that is, so I do a 5 year dry cycle. After 5 years, they come out of those containers and they go into the shop. I have a 10,000 square foot shop that's to this 30-foot ceilings to the rafters. It's like a Home Depot live edge studio, basically. So I've got a bunch of those things, and so I'll pull from my stock that's in house, while I've got stuff drying. And I think my goal is actually to supply the industry at some point with bodies and neck blanks from some of this stuff. So
Man, that's incredible. But 5 years, so that means what? When you started, you had a 5 year kind of wait period before you could start building guitars.
when I discovered it and started, like, I didn't decide until I had the stuff dried the way I wanted it dried, and it took 5 minutes to dry the first load. So I just figured, fuck it, if I got enough to make several hundred guitars out of it, usually it's about 10 trees, and 10 trees is a lot of wood, so that will last me that period of time. So if I can just do every 5 years and double every harvest, or every pull, then I'll have enough I got enough to last my career anyway. So I want to start sharing it and selling it and making sure that other builders get the chance to use this stuff, because I'm not the only guy that should be using it. There's every guitar builder that builds a Tele or a Strat should be using this stuff, because it's awesome.
Man, it makes me think of like brewing scotch or whiskey or wine or something. The lead time and the investment.
It's alchemic in that way, there certainly is. I mean, it's like any spirit, it passes through you. You get the aromas and all the nodes and all that kind of stuff, and you get to enjoy that. Same thing with a sound, a vibration that gets plucked on a string through a piece of wood. That thing dictates how that travels through the air, and how it hits you, and the intent from the person striking that note or that chord or creating that vibration is the source of that vibration, not the vibration itself. You know what I'm saying? The collision is the point of copulation. You know what I mean? So that has to come from that force has to come from within, and then that vibration is made, and then that vibration is sent. So it's all transmission.
Yeah, you're making vibration amplifiers in a way.
Yeah, I mean, there's just tools for communication. There's just tools for communication, and the coolest part about it is really standing in the back of a room, not just watching somebody work your tool, but like watching somebody regenerate the original thing that you intended to out there.
Yes, totally. And so when you're working with an artist, are you working with them from scratch to sort of build a custom experience, or do you have like stock guitars that you build for just general purchase?
Yeah, I mean, I have stock stuff, but mostly I like to make custom things. I like people to come to me with I like to provide the canvas, in the shape, and then you decorate it however you see fit. Whatever you think you want to hear, we'll try to get that. That's the goal.
Yeah.
I want to make you look, feel, and sound and perform as badass as you can.
I love that, man. I would love if you have any do you have any footage of your process? Because it would be fun to stitch that in with this
Yeah,
conversation.
there's actually a great little documentary that I did called Echo. I think it's called Echo from the Trees. I think it's on YouTube. And Troy did the whole soundtrack. It was amazing. A buddy of mine did it when we first moved here. James Romeo. He did the documentary when we first moved here, and it actually tells the whole story of the sinker logs and all that stuff. It really is a great little movie that we did, and kind of shows me picking everything. It tells the whole story. It's great, actually. It's wonderful, and it's I consider that serving a purpose, in coming here. I feel like the mission was accomplished, and getting to that. So the next thing is being able to manufacture pieces that are readily available that nobody has to bother me about. You know what I mean?
Is that the next 5-10 years for you?
My next venture in this is to basically, I want to make what I want to make, and that's it. I just want to, I'll build what I'm going to build, and that's going to be for sale, and that's it. And I'm probably not going to take any more custom orders ever. I don't want to anymore after this year. I want to do that.
Really?
And yeah, I mean this year. I mean this year. I don't want to take any more orders after this year. I only want to make what I want to make. And that's going to be a lot. There's still a long way to go. There's still a lot to do. There's still, a lot of projects with different artists that I want to get into and stuff like that. So the other purpose that I want to serve is I'm working on a program here in Detroit to provide guitars to a school, basically, in Detroit, Southwest Detroit. We're starting a program this next semester. It's going to be about instrument care and basic stuff. And then I'm going to introduce a loaner program to the students. I'm going to make 20 guitars and 20 basses. We're going to make it an educational program, whereas you have to follow a certain criteria to get the instrument. It's checked out to you for the duration of your educational experience, and if you so choose to continue on that path, you get to keep the thing. And they're not for sale. They're not for sale. They're not, that stuff. And the idea is to create a program that we can then take to other areas of the country, the world, and small schools around the country or world, and involve the guys that I work with. Really, I want to involve guys like Troy and Josh into educational experiences for kids that'll never have it.
Yeah. Man, that's incredible. How are you going to support that initiative? Are you building
What I'm doing is I got a little team put together. One of the teachers from the school and one of the guys here locally who runs this organization. These two dudes are helping me, and we're going to just basically put a presentation together for a couple of the larger corporations that this state has housed, and get them to support this thing because it's more important than their cars and stuff like that, And I'm gonna ask industry for support, basically, and if we can continue that, and we can. It's about star power, really. It's about the artists coming together with a corporation to provide not just a tool for a kid to learn on, but an avenue to pursue, perhaps, And I want to present all areas of the entertainment and art world to these kids, not just guitar players or producers or any other songwriters, but actual, there's so many different occupations in the entertainment industry that we need to continue. We need to continue putting art first. We need to continue making sure that art has. Otherwise, we're going to be eating McDonald's and shopping at Target, and it will leave forever. Within the next 30 years, we'll just become a slave race to the powers that be, and serve their fucking their industries. You know what I mean? And that's the shit that I don't want.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's the mission of the School of Imperfection, the learning aspect, because this is the podcast, but we're also doing all these creative meetup learning events and stuff, and building out just odd experiences. You know, we want to make the most creative, weirdest education platform on the planet because that doesn't exist. And so if you ever want to collaborate in that way, that would be rad. Or if we can support you on your mission, let me know. But
I'm just barely getting into it. Honestly, it's been a thought of mine for many years. I grew up in, like I said, in LA, and there was this place called Barnesdale Park in the middle of Hollywood where you could go get free art shit and do, like, as a kid with nothing.
cool.
Our mom would drop us off there and we could do like clay animation classes, or, you know, go see classical guitars in the auditorium, or go take ballet, or go do, you know, oil painting and pottery or stained glass. Or it was just like an art centric park. And that's where I kind of got, it's kind of where I collected my ideas, you know, kind of as a kid. I was like, oh, I can actually do this. You know, I don't have to go to school and know math. I don't have to know how to do any of this dumb shit. I don't have to go to college. I don't have to fuck that. I'm not doing that. I'm gonna fucking play rock and roll and make guitars, you know. And it's had its ups and downs and all that shit. But, like, you know, at the end of the day, it's like, what can I give? You know. Honestly, it's about having a purpose. And, you know, it's not, like I said, it's weird because it's very isolating too. It's like I'm basically a monk, you know, a good part of the day. You know. So yeah, it basically provides a means for me to support myself and my family, and also, you know, make sure that at least the world that I like is sounds good, you know, and looks good, you know.
Man, I feel you on many levels. So I respect you. Little did I know this would be such a good conversation, Gabriel. I appreciate you, man.
No,
always nice to meet a stranger doing really cool shit with a good journey. So thanks for.
Likewise, man. I mean, that's how I felt, you know, finding you. You know, it was like, oh, okay, this is cool. You know, this is like, I can get behind this, because it's like, yeah, any opportunity to tell the truth and any opportunity to like spill your guts is kind of a good day, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I'm mostly just each one of these is usually a therapy session for me. So, which I didn't do this time. I'm proud of myself for that. But thanks for joining. Is there anything we didn't touch on that you want to cover before I let you go live your life?
No, man. I think we're straight. You know, I think other than the struggles of just being a fucking weirdo in this world where everything like wants to be normal, you know, and nothing is, you know, nothing is. It's oftentimes it can be a little confusing coming out of the shop. It's almost like re-emerging out of the cave sometimes, you know.
Yeah,
it can be, you know. And I think my goal is to kind of undo what the childhood did still, you know, and kind of try to get closer to the essence of what it is I'm supposed to do here, and do it, you know, as best I can without hurting nobody, you know.
I do. I feel you. This is great. I'll let you go live your life, but thank you so much again for joining.
Oh, thank you, Gabriel. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I hope we keep in touch.
Yeah, me too.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the School of Imperfection podcast. If you are interested in exploring these ideas and more with us, don't forget to follow and subscribe to catch every future episode. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to leave us a rating or send us an email to share your thoughts through www.theschoolofimperfection.com. We're always looking for more guests as well. So if you feel like you have an interesting perspective or a topic our podcast has not covered or has, we'd love to connect with you. I'm your host, Mikey Crystal. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.